My name is Maya, and at 27, I thought I had gotten used to being invisible at family gatherings. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened last Sunday when my sister's fiancé pointed out the window and asked whose Ferrari was parked across the street. The silence that followed his question would shatter everything my family thought they knew about me. What happened next changed our relationships forever, and honestly, I'm still processing it all. See, for years, my family had painted me as the one who couldn't quite get her life together. The dreamer. The one who needed gentle guidance and constant worry. They had their reasons, I suppose, but what they didn't know was that while they were busy planning my intervention, I was building something they never could have imagined. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The thing about growing up as the youngest daughter in the Martinez family is that everyone already has your story written before you even get a chance to pick up the pen. My parents, Rosa and Carlos, immigrated from Colombia in the 80s with nothing but determination and a belief that education would save their children from the struggles they endured. They built a comfortable middle-class life in Clearwater, Florida, complete with a mortgage they were proud to pay and a backyard where mom grew tomatoes that reminded her of home. My older sister Elena had followed their script perfectly. Nursing degree from University of South Florida, married her college boyfriend Rick who worked in medical sales, bought a house in the suburbs with a white picket fence that mom photographed every Christmas. Elena was everything our parents had dreamed their American daughters would become: stable, responsible, conventional. She represented the success of their sacrifice, and they never let anyone forget it. Then there was me. Maya, the question mark. I had always been different, even as a child. While Elena was organizing her dollhouse with surgical precision, I was drawing elaborate fantasy worlds on every surface mom would let me touch. When Elena was student body treasurer, I was hiding in the art room during lunch, working on projects that my teachers called imaginative and my parents called impractical. The divide only grew wider as we got older. By the time I graduated high school, the family narrative was set. Elena was the achiever, and I was the artistic one who would need extra support to find my way in the real world. College was a compromise. I studied graphic design, which seemed creative enough to make me happy but practical enough to maybe lead to a real job someday. Mom and Dad hoped I would eventually settle into something stable, like working for a nice company with benefits and a pension plan. But life has a way of surprising everyone, including yourself. After graduation, I moved into a tiny studio apartment in downtown Tampa. The place was barely 400 square feet, with a Murphy bed that never quite folded correctly and a kitchen that was more like an elaborate closet. But it had huge windows that faced east, flooding the space with morning light that made everything feel possible. More importantly, it was mine. For the first time in my life, I wasn't living under the weight of anyone else's expectations. The freelance graphic design work started small. A logo for a friend's food truck. Business cards for my neighbor who started a dog walking service. A website for a local boutique that paid me in-store credit and $50 cash. I was making enough to cover rent and groceries, which felt like a victory even if my parents saw it as barely scraping by. The Sunday dinners at their house in Clearwater became a weekly reminder of my status as the family member who was still figuring things out. Every week, the same questions wrapped in concerned smiles. Was I eating enough? Did I need help with my electric bill? Had I considered looking into administrative jobs with the school district? They meant well, but their care felt like a soft prison made of worry and diminished expectations. Elena would arrive at these dinners fresh from her shifts at Tampa General, still in scrubs that made her look important and necessary. She and Rick would talk about refinancing their mortgage or planning a vacation to Costa Rica or shopping for a new SUV. They inhabited the world of adults who had figured it out, while I felt perpetually stuck in some prolonged adolescence where my dreams were tolerated but not taken seriously. The conversations always followed the same pattern. Dad would ask Elena about her patients, and she would share stories that made Mom beam with pride. Rick would talk about his sales territory expanding, and Dad would nod with the appreciation of one businessman recognizing another. Then they would turn to me with expressions that somehow managed to be encouraging and pitying at the same time. How was the design work going? Any new clients? Maybe I should consider taking some business classes at the community college. Had I thought about applying for positions at marketing firms? They could ask Rick if his company needed any creative services. The suggestions came from love, but they carried an underlying assumption that what I was doing wasn't quite enough, would never be quite enough, and needed their intervention to transform into something real. I learned to give answers that were truthful but vague. Work was going well. I was staying busy. I was exploring opportunities. These responses seemed to satisfy their need to feel helpful while protecting the fragile shoots of confidence I was trying to grow in private. Because the truth was, despite their doubts and my own frequent moments of panic, something was starting to build. It started with Sarah Chen, a software developer who hired me to design the brand identity for her new app. She was launching a productivity tool for remote teams, and she needed everything from a logo to website design to marketing materials. The project was bigger than anything I had tackled before, and the deadline was aggressive. I spent 3 weeks practically living at my computer, surviving on coffee and the kind of manic energy that comes from working on something you believe in. When Sarah saw the final presentation, she stared at her laptop screen for a long moment, before looking up at me with something like wonder. The designs were exactly what she had envisioned but couldn't articulate. The logo was clean and memorable. The website communicated professionalism and innovation. The marketing materials made her app look like something a major company would launch. She paid my invoice immediately and asked if I was available for ongoing work as her company grew. More importantly, she started referring me to other entrepreneurs in her network. Suddenly, I wasn't just Maya who did design work on the side. I was Maya who could take your startup from idea to visual reality. The referrals led to more referrals. The small projects grew into comprehensive brand packages. The clients went from friends of friends to legitimate companies with real budgets and serious deadlines. I found myself working with tech startups, online retailers, consulting firms, and even a few nonprofits that wanted to refresh their image. My studio apartment became a de facto office. The Murphy bed stayed folded up most days because the desk had taken over that corner of the room. I installed professional lighting and bought a camera for product photography. The kitchen counter became a packaging station where I assembled presentation materials for client meetings. Every surface was covered with mood boards, color swatches, and printed prototypes. The money started to get serious too. Instead of barely covering rent, I was building savings. Instead of shopping at thrift stores out of necessity, I was choosing vintage pieces because I liked them. Instead of declining dinner invitations because I couldn't afford them, I was turning down social events because I was too busy with client work. But at the Sunday dinners, I remained Maya who was still figuring things out. Partly because I didn't know how to change the narrative without sounding like I was bragging, and partly because I was superstitious about discussing success before it felt completely secure. The freelance life had taught me that feast could turn to famine quickly, and I didn't want to jinx the momentum by celebrating too early. So when Dad asked how work was going, I said it was good. When Mom worried about my financial stability, I assured her I was managing fine. When Elena suggested I look into more traditional career paths, I nodded and said I would think about it. These conversations felt like speaking different languages, where my words meant one thing to me and something entirely different to them. The disconnect became more pronounced as my business grew. I started turning down family events because I had client deadlines. I bought professional equipment that my parents saw as expensive toys. I worked nights and weekends not because I had to, but because I was genuinely excited about the projects I was creating. My life looked chaotic and unstable from the outside, even as it felt more purposeful and profitable than ever before on the inside. Elena, meanwhile, had become engaged to Rick, and their relationship represented everything my parents understood about building a secure future. They had dated for 4 years before he proposed. They had saved for a down payment on a house. They were planning a wedding with a reasonable budget and a realistic timeline. They talked about having kids in a few years, after they had established their careers and paid down some debt. Their life was a masterclass in sensible decisions and careful planning. The engagement announcement had been made at a Sunday dinner 6 months earlier, complete with a ring that Elena displayed with appropriate joy and humility. Mom had cried. Dad had shaken Rick's hand with the gravity of a business deal. I had hugged my sister and admired the diamond while feeling like I was watching their life from behind glass, unable to touch or fully comprehend the world they inhabited. The wedding planning had dominated family conversations ever since. Venue tours and dress fittings and discussions about whether to have a DJ or a band. Rick's family would be flying in from Ohio. Elena was considering whether to hyphenate her name. They were looking at honeymoon destinations that balanced adventure with affordability. Every detail was analyzed and debated with the seriousness of international diplomacy. I participated in these conversations as best I could, offering opinions about flower arrangements and suggesting photographers I knew from my professional network. But increasingly, I felt like an anthropologist studying the customs of a culture I could observe but never fully join. Their concerns about seating charts and catering menus felt both important and completely foreign to my daily reality of client deadlines and creative briefs. The distance wasn't intentional on anyone's part, but it was growing. My family saw me as sweet but scattered, creative but impractical, working hard but not necessarily building toward anything substantial. I saw myself as finally finding my footing, creating work that mattered, building a business that could sustain the life I actually wanted rather than the life they thought I should want. The gap between these perceptions would have probably continued indefinitely if not for what happened 3 weeks ago. The moment that would force all of us to reconcile the Maya they thought they knew with the Maya I had actually become. The moment that started with a simple question about a car and ended with my family seeing me clearly for the first time in years. But before I get to that Sunday dinner, I need to tell you about the decision I made that changed everything. The decision that seemed completely insane to anyone who knew my financial history but felt absolutely necessary to me. The decision that would become the catalyst for everything that followed. 2 months earlier, I had done something that even I couldn't quite believe. Something that represented every ounce of confidence I had built in myself and my business. Over the previous year. Something that would have horrified my parents if they had known about it at the time. I had bought a Ferrari. The Ferrari purchase had started as a joke, the kind of impossible dream you entertain when you're stuck in traffic behind a luxury car. I had been driving home from a particularly successful client meeting with Marcus Thompson, the founder of a fintech startup called ClearPath. His company had just secured series of funding, and he wanted a complete rebrand to match their new trajectory. The project was worth more than I had made in my first year of freelancing combined. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sitting at a red light on Bayshore Boulevard, I found myself behind a pristine red Ferrari 488 Spider. The afternoon sun was hitting the car at the perfect angle, making it look like liquid fire. The owner was a woman about my age with dark hair, pulled back in a sleek ponytail. She looked confident, successful, completely at ease in a machine that cost more than most people's houses. For a moment, I allowed myself to imagine what it would feel like to be her. When the light turned green, she accelerated with a sound that was part roar, part purr, part symphony. I watched her disappear around a curve and thought about how different her life must be from mine. How different it must feel to move through the world in something that announced your success before you even had to speak. That night, I did something I had never done before. I researched the car. Not in a serious way, just curiosity. I wanted to understand what I had seen, to put numbers to the dream. The 488 Spider started at around $250,000. For a decent used one, you were looking at somewhere between $180,000 to $200,000. Still an astronomical number, but somehow more concrete than the vague concept of Ferrari money. I closed my laptop and went to bed, but the image of that car stayed with me. Not just the vehicle itself, but what it represented. Freedom. Success. The ability to choose something beautiful and powerful simply because you could. For someone who had spent years defending her career choices and justifying her life decisions, the idea of owning something that needed no explanation or apology was intoxicating. The Marcus Thompson project launched 2 weeks later to incredible reviews. His company's new visual identity was featured in TechCrunch and Entrepreneur magazine. My Instagram DMs flooded with inquiries from other startups who wanted to work with the designer behind ClearPath's rebrand. Suddenly, I wasn't chasing clients anymore. They were chasing me. The financial transformation was rapid and surreal. In 6 weeks, I signed contracts worth more than I had made in the previous 2 years combined. A blockchain company that wanted to look more trustworthy. A sustainable fashion brand launching in 3 cities. A medical device startup preparing for FDA approval. Each project was bigger than the last, each client more sophisticated and demanding. I moved out of my studio apartment into a 1-bedroom loft in Hyde Park. The space had exposed brick walls, industrial lighting, and enough room for a proper office setup. For the first time, I could separate my living space from my workspace, which made both feel more professional and more comfortable. I bought real furniture instead of assembling pieces from discount stores. I installed a security system and got renter's insurance that actually covered my equipment. But the biggest change was internal. I stopped feeling apologetic about my success. When clients asked about my rates, I quoted them confidently instead of with nervous laughter. When potential projects didn't align with my vision, I declined. Politely instead of desperately trying to make them work. I started thinking of myself as a business owner rather than someone who did design work on the side. That shift in mindset made everything else possible, including the decision that would shock my family into seeing me differently. I had been working with a luxury car broker named James Rodriguez on some marketing materials for his dealership. He specialized in high-end vehicles for clients who wanted specific models without the hassle of traditional shopping. During one Of our meetings, he mentioned he had a 2019 Ferrari 488 Spider coming in from a private collector in Miami. The car had low mileage, a clean history, and the owner was motivated to sell quickly. "It's beautiful," he said, showing me photos on his tablet. Rosso Corsa red, black interior, every option you could want. The owner is relocating to Europe and can't take it with him. He's priced it to move. I looked at the pictures with professional interest, admiring the lines and proportions like I would study any well-designed object. But something in my chest tightened with possibility. "What's he asking?" I heard myself say. James quoted a number that was substantial but not impossible. Not for someone whose business had just tripled its revenue in 8 weeks. Not for someone who had been living below her means for years while building something real. "Are you interested?" he asked, probably reading something in my expression. I should have said no. I should have thanked him for showing me and moved on to discussing his marketing campaign. Instead, I heard myself asking about financing options and inspection schedules and insurance requirements. The practical voice in my head was screaming warnings about cash flow and emergency funds and responsible financial planning. But there was another voice, one that had been quiet for too long, that whispered about dreams deferred and success unacknowledged and the right to claim what you had earned. "Can I see it?" I asked. 2 days later, I was standing in James's climate-controlled showroom, staring at the most beautiful machine I had ever seen up close. The Ferrari sat under perfect lighting like a sculpture, every curve deliberate and purposeful. The red paint had a depth that seemed to go on forever. The interior smelled like leather and possibility. James handed me the keys without ceremony. "Take your time," he said. "Feel free to start her up." The engine came to life with a sound that resonated in my chest. It was powerful but refined, aggressive but controlled. I sat in the driver's seat with my hands on the steering wheel, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. The test drive was a revelation. The car responded to every input with precision and eagerness. The acceleration was smooth and relentless. The handling was intuitive, like the machine was reading my intentions and helping me execute them perfectly. It wasn't just transportation, it was communication between human and engineering marvel. When I returned to the dealership, James was waiting with paperwork and a knowing smile. "So," he said, "what do you think?" I thought about my family's Sunday dinners and their gentle concerns about my financial stability. I thought about Elena's sensible Honda Accord and Rick's practical Toyota Camry. I thought about years of being seen as the impractical dreamer who would eventually need rescuing from her own poor judgment. Then I thought about the contracts on my desk and the clients calling with new projects and the bank account that reflected months of harder work than I had ever done in my life. I thought about the woman I had become without anyone noticing, including myself sometimes. "I'll take it," I said. The paperwork took 2 hours. The insurance calls took another hour. The transfer of funds was completed with digital signatures and electronic confirmations that felt both momentous and surprisingly simple. By Thursday afternoon, I owned a Ferrari. I drove it home slowly, hyper-aware of every other vehicle on the road. In my rearview mirror, I could see drivers taking photos at red lights. Pedestrians stopped and stared. Parking lot attendants did double takes. The attention was both thrilling and terrifying, like wearing a dress that was slightly too glamorous for the occasion but looked absolutely perfect. In my new neighborhood, the Ferrari fit better than I had expected. Hyde Park had its share of successful professionals who drove nice cars and lived in renovated lofts and took their careers seriously. The car was still unusual, but it wasn't completely out of place among the Tesla sedans and BMW convertibles that populated the area. What surprised me was how quickly I adapted to driving it. Within a week, the extreme responsiveness felt natural. The attention from other drivers became background noise. The ritual of starting the engine became part of my daily routine rather than a special event. I discovered that owning something extraordinary was less about the constant thrill and more about the quiet confidence that came from knowing you could have extraordinary things. The more time I spent with the car, the more it felt like a tangible representation of the business I had built and the woman I had become. It was beautiful but functional, powerful but controlled, attention-getting but ultimately about performance rather than show. It required confidence to drive well and commanded respect without demanding approval. But I didn't tell my family about it. Not because I was ashamed or hiding something, but because I knew they wouldn't understand. How could I explain that buying a Ferrari wasn't a financial mistake but a declaration of independence? How could I make them see that the purchase represented years of careful planning and disciplined saving rather than reckless impulse spending? How could I convince them that I wasn't the same person they worried about at Sunday dinners? Instead, I kept living my dual existence. During the week, I was Maya, the successful business owner who drove a Ferrari to client meetings and charged premium rates for premium work. On Sundays, I was Maya, the struggling artist who needed gentle guidance and careful monitoring. The cognitive dissonance was exhausting but seemed easier than confronting their perceptions directly. I told myself that eventually, when my success was so obvious that it couldn't be ignored, the conversation would happen naturally. I would find the right moment to share what I had built, and they would understand and celebrate and maybe even apologize for underestimating me. What I didn't anticipate was that the revelation would come not through my careful planning but through pure accident. That a simple question from Elena's fiancé would shatter the comfortable fiction we had all been maintaining about who I was and what I was capable of achieving. For 3 weeks, I managed to keep my two worlds separate. I parked the Ferrari in my building's garage when I went to family dinners. I drove Elena's old Honda Civic that she had given me when she bought her new car. I talked about my work in the same vague, understated way I always had. I let them continue seeing me as someone who was trying hard but not quite succeeding. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was hiding my greatest professional triumph from the people whose approval I had spent years seeking. But their approval had become less important than their comfort, and my revelation had become less urgent than maintaining family harmony. I told myself that protecting their feelings was more important than correcting their misconceptions. That delicate balance worked until Elena announced that Rick wanted to meet at the house early before our usual Sunday dinner. He had been looking at engagement rings and wanted Dad's advice about diamonds and settings and the kind of practical considerations that Rick always brought to major decisions. Elena was excited about the prospect of upgrading her ring for their first anniversary, and she wanted the whole family's input on styles and priorities. I agreed to come early, planning to drive the Honda and slip seamlessly into my role as supportive younger sister with more enthusiasm than expertise. That sounds creative and challenging, Rick said. The startup world is so competitive. They must really value good design to stand out. They do, I agreed, grateful for his understanding. A lot of these companies are fighting for attention in crowded markets. The visual presentation can make a huge difference in how customers perceive them. Dad nodded approvingly. Smart business owners know that image matters. Look at Elena's hospital, they spent a fortune on rebranding last year because they wanted to look more modern and patient-friendly. Exactly, Elena chimed in. The old logo looked like it was designed in the 80s. Now everything looks clean and professional. It definitely makes a difference. I smiled, remembering the months I had spent trying to convince local businesses that good design was worth investing in. Now my clients came to me already understanding that principle, often with budgets that reflected their commitment to getting it right. Maya's always been artistic, Mom said with the tone of someone sharing a fond childhood memory. Remember those drawings she used to make of imaginary worlds? So detailed and creative. I saved some of them in a box somewhere. The conversation was following its predictable path, casting my current work as an extension of childhood creativity rather than professional expertise. I had learned not to correct these characterizations directly, but sometimes the disconnect between their perception and my reality felt almost surreal. Rick seemed to sense something in my expression. It must be satisfying to see your artistic skills turn into a real business, he said. I imagine it's rewarding to create something that helps other people succeed. It really is, I said, appreciating his effort to take my work seriously. There's something special about helping someone take an idea and turn it into something tangible that represents their vision. Speaking of visions, Elena said, steering the conversation back toward wedding planning, we should show Maya the ring styles we've been looking at. I want her opinion on which ones would photograph well. For the next hour, we pored over catalogs and websites, debating the merits of different settings and stone shapes. Elena had narrowed her choices down to 3 options, each beautiful in its own way but requiring careful consideration of her lifestyle, budget, and personal style. Rick listened to every opinion and asked thoughtful questions, clearly determined to make a decision that would make Elena happy. I found myself genuinely enjoying the conversation, despite my usual discomfort with detailed discussions of traditional milestones I hadn't reached myself. There was something touching about watching Rick navigate the complexity of choosing something that would represent their commitment to each other. His careful attention to Elena's preferences and his willingness to seek advice showed a level of consideration that boded well for their marriage. As the afternoon wore on, I began to relax into the familiar rhythm of family time. The conversations flowed naturally from wedding planning to work updates to neighborhood gossip. Mom shared news about the Hendersons' new baby and the Johnsons' kitchen renovation. Dad reported on his golf game and the ongoing saga of trying to get the Homeowners Association to approve new landscaping for the community entrance. It was the kind of comfortable domesticity that I had always observed from a slight distance but never fully inhabited. Elena and Rick seemed to slot seamlessly into this world of shared concerns and mutual interests. They talked about mortgage rates and vacation planning and home improvement projects with the easy familiarity of people who had found their place in the conventional markers of adult success. I participated in these conversations as best I could, offering opinions and asking questions and sharing what little I knew about topics like refinancing and lawn care. But increasingly, I felt like an anthropologist studying the customs of a culture that was familiar but foreign. Their concerns felt both important and completely removed from my daily reality of client deadlines and creative challenges and the particular pressures of running a business. The afternoon light was beginning to slant through the living room windows when Rick stood up and stretched, walking over to look outside. Mom's house sat on a corner lot with large windows that offered a clear view of the tree-lined street where I had learned to ride a bike and Elena had practiced driving before getting her license. "Beautiful neighborhood," Rick said, admiring the view. "So peaceful and well-maintained. I can see why you chose to raise your family here." Mom and Dad exchanged the pleased look of homeowners whose choices were being validated by someone whose opinion they valued. "We've been here 22 years, Dad said with pride. "Watched all the kids on the block grow up and go to college. It's been a good place to build a life." Rick continued looking out the window, and I saw his expression change slightly. His eyebrows raised, and he leaned closer to the glass with the look of someone who had spotted something unexpected. "That's interesting," he said, his voice carrying a note of genuine surprise. "There's a Ferrari parked across the street. Beautiful car, looks like a 488 Spider." The words hit me like cold water. I felt my stomach drop and my heart rate accelerate as I realized what had happened. In my rush to get to the house on time, distracted by the construction detour, I had driven the Ferrari instead of switching to Elena's old Honda. The car that represented everything my family didn't know about my success was sitting in plain sight, parked directly across from the living room window where we had spent the entire afternoon. Elena joined Rick at the window, followed by Mom and Dad. I remained in my chair, frozen between the urge to confess immediately and the desperate hope that Rick's interest would pass without further investigation. "Wow," Elena said, pressing her face closer to the glass. "That's definitely not a car you see in this neighborhood every day." Mom squinted through the window, her expression mixing curiosity with mild disapproval. "It's been there for a while now." What I didn't plan for was the construction project that had torn up the street leading to my parents' neighborhood, forcing all traffic onto the main boulevard that ran directly past their house. What I didn't plan for was forgetting to switch cars in my rush to get there on time. What I didn't plan for was parking my Ferrari 488 Spider directly across from the house where my family was gathered, in plain sight of the living room window where Rick would spend the entire afternoon admiring what he assumed was a neighbor's incredible car. The stage was set for a collision between the Maya they thought they knew and the Maya I had actually become. All it would take was one innocent question to bring both versions of my life crashing together in a way that would change everything forever. The driveway of my childhood home looked exactly the same as it had for the past 15 years. Mom's ceramic planters lined the walkway, overflowing with the bright pink impatiens she planted every spring. Dad's tools were organized with military precision in the open garage, each item hanging in its designated spot on the pegboard he had installed when I was in middle school. The basketball hoop Elena and I had begged for still stood at regulation height, though neither of us had touched a ball in years. I sat in the Ferrari for a moment before getting out, letting the engine idle while I gathered my thoughts. Through the living room window, I could see my family gathered around the coffee table, probably looking at ring catalogs or wedding magazines. The scene looked warm and intimate, the kind of domestic happiness that had always felt slightly out of reach for me but perfectly natural for Elena. The irony of sitting in a $250,000 car while feeling like the family outsider wasn't lost on me. Success, I was learning, didn't automatically translate into belonging. If anything, it sometimes made the distance feel more pronounced, like looking at your childhood home from the window of a plane that was flying too high to land. I turned off the engine and grabbed my purse, a leather bag I had bought after landing my third major client. Even my accessories had evolved over the past year, though I doubted anyone in my family would notice the difference between designer leather and department store vinyl. They saw what they expected to see, which had become both a shield and a source of frustration. The front door opened before I could knock, and Elena appeared with a smile that was equal parts excitement and stress. Wedding planning had transformed my usually composed sister into someone who oscillated between manic joy and overwhelming anxiety, sometimes within the same conversation. "Perfect timing," she said, pulling me into a hug that smelled like her signature vanilla perfume. "Rick just got here, and Dad's already started his lecture about diamond clarity versus cut. You know how he gets when he has an audience for his jewelry expertise." I followed her into the living room, where Rick was indeed seated at Dad's mercy, nodding politely while Dad explained the 4 CS of diamond evaluation with the enthusiasm Of someone who had researched the topic extensively but never actually bought more than one engagement ring in his life. Mom sat nearby, occasionally interjecting with comments about settings and styles that she had clearly been contemplating since Elena's engagement was announced. Rick looked genuinely interested rather than trapped, which was one of the things I had come to appreciate about my future brother-in-law. He had a gift for making people feel heard and valued, even when they were explaining things he probably already knew. It was a quality that served him well in medical sales and made him a natural fit for our family's tendency toward enthusiastic oversharing. Maya. Mom stood up to greet me, her face lighting up with the particular warmth she reserved for family gatherings. How was the drive? Traffic wasn't too bad, I hope? A little construction, but nothing terrible, I said, settling into the armchair that had become my unofficial seat over the years of Sunday dinners. Sorry, I'm a few minutes late. You're right on time, Rick said, looking up from the ring catalog Dad had thrust into his hands. I was just learning about the difference between princess cut and cushion cut diamonds. Apparently, there's a whole science to this that I never appreciated. Dad beamed with the satisfaction of someone whose expertise was being properly acknowledged. Most people just walk into a store and point at something shiny, he said. But if you're going to make an investment this significant, you should understand what you're buying. Exactly, Rick agreed. Elena deserves something perfect, so I want to make sure I get it right. Elena blushed with pleasure, reaching over to squeeze Rick's hand. The gesture was unconscious and intimate, the kind of casual affection that spoke to how comfortable they had become with each other. Watching them together, I felt the familiar mixture of happiness for my sister and distance from the life they were building together. Mom disappeared into the kitchen and returned with a tray of coffee and the coconut cookies she made for special occasions. The ritual of serving and settling back into conversation was so familiar that I could have predicted every movement, every polite exchange, every comfortable pause. This was the choreography of family, performed with variations but never significantly altered. So Maya, Rick said, accepting a cup of coffee from Mom, Elena tells me your design business is really taking off. That's exciting. I felt the familiar tightness in my chest that accompanied these conversations about my work. How to be honest without sounding like I was bragging. How to share good news without invalidating their concern. How to explain that their worries were not only unnecessary but increasingly disconnected from my reality. It's going well, I said, opting for my usual diplomatic understatement. Staying busy with some interesting projects. That's wonderful, Mom said, settling back into her chair. We were just telling Rick how proud we are of you for sticking with it. It takes real determination to build something from nothing. The phrase, from nothing, stung a little, though I knew she meant it as a compliment. To her, my journey looked like starting with no advantages and slowly climbing toward respectability. She couldn't see that nothing had become something substantial much faster than any of us had anticipated, including me. What kind of projects are you working on these days? Rick asked with genuine curiosity. I hesitated, trying to find the balance between honesty and humility that these conversations required. Mostly branding work for startups. Logo design. Website development, marketing materials. Companies that are launching new products or services and need to establish their visual identity. Elena squeezed his arm affectionately. I love how passionate you get about engineering. It's like watching you discover art. Because it is art, Rick said, walking slowly around the front of the car. This isn't just transportation. This is sculpture that happens to have an engine. Dad remained more skeptical, though I could see him appreciating the craftsmanship despite his disapproval of the expense. I'll give them credit for quality, he said, examining the paint finish. You can see why these things hold their value better than regular cars. The detail work is amazing, Mom added, pointing to the Ferrari badge on the front grille. Everything looks so precise and intentional. I stood frozen on the sidewalk, watching my family circle the car like art critics examining a museum piece. Part of me wanted to appreciate the moment, to see them discovering something beautiful and impressive. But mostly I felt trapped between the inevitable revelation and the growing weight of my deception. Rick had moved to the driver's side and was peering through the window at the interior. The seats look custom, he said. And that steering wheel, you can tell it's designed for performance driving, not just cruising around town. I wonder what the owner is like, Elena mused, joining him at the window. They must have interesting stories. You don't buy something like this without some serious success behind you. The irony of her comment hit me like a physical blow. They were standing next to my car, admiring my success, while completely unable to imagine that their sister and daughter could be the person behind it. The cognitive dissonance was almost surreal. Probably some tech entrepreneur, Dad speculated. That's who has this kind of money these days. Someone who sold an app for Millions or got in early on cryptocurrency. Or maybe they inherited it, Mom suggested. Some people are just born lucky. Rick was still studying the car with genuine fascination. I'd love to know what it's like to drive something with this much power. The acceleration must be incredible. Fast enough to get yourself in serious trouble, Dad said with parental concern. Cars like this are built for racetracks, not residential neighborhoods. Elena laughed. Dad, you sound like you're worried Rick is going to run out and buy one tomorrow. Well, I hope he has more sense than that, Dad replied, though his tone was more teasing than serious. Beautiful to look at, but completely impractical for someone with real responsibilities. I felt my face flush with a mixture of embarrassment and frustration. Every comment reinforced their assumptions about responsibility and practicality, creating a narrative where owning the Ferrari automatically disqualified someone from being sensible or grounded. They couldn't conceive that the two things might coexist in the same person. Rick had completed his circuit around the car and was now standing near the rear, admiring the subtle spoiler and dual exhaust pipes. The engineering is just gorgeous, he said. Every element serves both form and function. Maya, what do you think? Elena called out, noticing that I had remained silently on the periphery. You're the one with the design eye. What do you see when you look at it? All eyes turned to me, and I felt the weight of the moment settling on my shoulders. I could offer some neutral observation about aesthetics and continue the charade, or I could use this opening to begin telling the truth. The choice felt enormous, like standing at the edge of a cliff with no clear view of what lay below. It's beautiful, I said carefully. The design language is very coherent. Everything flows together in a way that feels intentional and harmonious. Rick nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. It's not just flashy for the sake of being flashy. There's real sophistication in the choices they made. Though I still think it's too much car for someone our age, Mom said, unable to let go of her practical concerns. The insurance alone must cost more than some people's rent. And the maintenance, Dad added. These European sports cars are notorious for expensive repairs. One little problem and you're looking at thousands of dollars. Elena was examining the license plate with curiosity. Florida plates, so at least it's not some tourist showing off. But I wonder who in this neighborhood could afford something like this. The Hendersons are doing well, but not Ferrari well. And the Johnsons just retired, they're more worried about saving money than spending it. Maybe someone new moved in, Rick suggested. I noticed it when I was getting the mail earlier. Some young person, probably showing off for social media or something. Dad shook his head with the resigned disappointment of someone whose faith in fiscal responsibility was constantly being tested by the younger generation. Probably rented it for the weekend to impress someone. These kids today think they need to look rich instead of actually building wealth. Or it could be financed to the maximum, Elena added with the authority of someone who had recently learned about responsible debt management from her fiancé. People take on these huge car payments just to drive something flashy, then wonder why they can't afford a house. Rick was still studying the car with the appreciation of someone who understood automotive engineering. It really is gorgeous, though. I've always admired the 488 model. The design is just perfect, aggressive but elegant. And the performance is supposed to be incredible. Performance doesn't matter if you can't afford the insurance, Dad said pragmatically. Cars like that are money pits. Beautiful to look at, but completely impractical for someone who isn't already wealthy. I sat in my chair, listening to my family dissect the financial irresponsibility of whoever owned the Ferrari parked across the street. Each comment felt like a small knife, not because they were wrong about cars being expensive, but because they were so confident in their assumptions about the kind of person who would make such a purchase. They weren't wrong about the practical considerations. The Ferrari was expensive to insure, costly to maintain, and completely unnecessary for transportation purposes. But their automatic assumption that the owner must be either reckless or posturing revealed how little they understood about my financial situation and business success. More than that, their comments revealed the gap between their world and mine. They saw the car as an irresponsible luxury that represented poor judgment and misplaced priorities. I saw it as a symbol of achievement, a tangible representation of years of hard work and careful planning finally paying off in a way that allowed me to choose something beautiful simply because I wanted it. The conversation continued around me as I sat paralyzed by indecision. Should I tell them the truth immediately? Should I wait for a better moment? Should I let them continue their analysis of my poor financial judgment while I sat silently in their living room? Rick was still looking out the window with genuine admiration. I have to admit, I'd love to take a closer look at it. Maybe even meet the owner and ask about the driving experience. I've been thinking about treating myself to something special after this promotion, and a Ferrari has always been a dream car. You should go look, Elena encouraged him. What's the worst that could happen? Maybe they'll be happy to talk about it. Mom looked skeptical. Don't encourage expensive dreams, Elena. Rick is responsible with money, not like whoever bought that thing. It's just looking, Elena protested. Besides, maybe the owner is nice. Could be interesting to meet someone from the neighborhood who has such different taste in cars. Rick was clearly torn between his genuine interest in the vehicle and his awareness that expressing too much enthusiasm might seem inappropriate or irresponsible. Maybe I'll just take a quick walk over there, he said finally. Just to admire the engineering. I promise I won't start shopping for one myself. Dad chuckled. As long as you remember that looking is free, but everything else about that car is expensive. I knew I was running out of time. In a few minutes, Rick would walk across the street to admire my Ferrari, and the truth would come out in the most awkward way possible. I could either confess now, with some control over the narrative, or wait for the inevitable revelation and deal with the aftermath. But as I opened my mouth to speak, Elena made a suggestion that changed everything. You know what? She said, turning away from the window with sudden decisiveness. Let's all go look at it together. Maya, you should come too. You always notice design details that the rest of us miss. It could be fun to see what a $250,000 car looks like up close. And just like that, we were all heading toward the front door, walking as a family toward the Ferrari that would shatter every assumption they had made about my life over the past 2 years. The walk across the street felt like it lasted forever and happened in an instant simultaneously. My legs moved automatically while my mind raced through scenarios, each one ending with varying degrees of shock, confusion, and disappointment. From my family. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the pavement, and I could hear the distant sound of children playing in someone's backyard, their laughter carrying on the warm Florida breeze. Rick walked slightly ahead of the group, his excitement barely contained. Elena stayed close beside him, her hand linked through his arm in the casual way of couples who had moved past the need to constantly prove their affection. Mom and Dad followed at a more measured pace, their expressions mixing curiosity with the kind of resigned tolerance parents develop for their adult children's interests. I trailed behind them all, my heart hammering against my ribs as we approached the car that would change everything. The Ferrari sat exactly where I had left it, pristine and gleaming under the dappled sunlight filtering through the oak trees that lined the street. From this angle, with the afternoon light hitting the curves just right, it looked even more dramatic than usual. Incredible, Rick breathed as we got closer. The proportions are absolutely perfect. You can tell this was designed by people who understand both aesthetics and aerodynamics. Maya, this is incredible. Do you have any idea how amazing this is? You built a multi-million-dollar business from scratch while we were all worried about whether you could pay your electric bill. To be fair, I said, managing a small smile. There were times when I couldn't pay my electric bill. The success is pretty recent. But you did it, Elena said, her voice stronger now. You actually did it. While we were all giving you advice about being practical, you were out there being more successful than any of us. The admission seemed to cost her something, but there was genuine pride mixed with the embarrassment. I could see her recalibrating. Everything she thought she knew about our relationship and our respective places in the family hierarchy. Can I see inside? Rick asked, his enthusiasm overcoming any awkwardness about the situation. I gestured toward the passenger side. Be my guest. He slid into the passenger seat with the reverence of someone entering a cathedral. This is unbelievable, he said, running his hands over the dashboard and steering wheel. The craftsmanship is even better up close. Elena joined him, squeezing into the small space behind the seats. It's like a cockpit, she said with wonder. Everything looks so purposeful and precise. Mom and Dad approached more cautiously, still processing the fundamental shift in how they understood their younger daughter. Dad examined the engine bay with the appreciation of someone who understood mechanical complexity, while Mom focused on the interior details with her eye for quality and design. The leather work is beautiful, Mom said, running her fingers along the seat stitching. And everything fits together so perfectly. Italian craftsmanship, I explained. They build each car by hand, which is part of why they cost so much but also why they're considered works of art. Dad closed the hood and looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. It was respect, genuine and unqualified. Maya, I owe you an apology. We all do. We thought we were being supportive, but we were actually being condescending. You weren't condescending, I protested, though we both knew that wasn't entirely true. You were being parents. You saw your daughter struggling and wanted to help. But you weren't struggling, Elena said from inside the car. You were succeeding beyond anything we could imagine, and we were too blind to see it. Rick emerged from the passenger seat with a huge grin. I have to ask, what's it like to drive Want to find out? I asked, surprising myself with the offer. His eyes widened. Are you serious? I looked around at my family, all of whom were staring at me like I had revealed I was secretly a superhero. Maybe I had been, in a way. Maybe choosing to build something extraordinary while letting everyone think you were ordinary was its own kind of superpower. Everyone pile in, I said. Let's go for a ride. The next 20 minutes were a revelation for all of us. Rick rode shotgun while Elena, Mom, and Dad squeezed into the minimal back seats, their complaints about the cramped quarters drowned out by their amazement at the car's performance. I drove them through the winding roads that led to the bay, letting the Ferrari stretch its legs in a way that demonstrated why people paid premium prices for engineering excellence. The acceleration is insane, Rick said as we merged onto the highway. It doesn't feel like a car, it feels like a missile with leather seats. And the sound, Elena added from behind us. It's like music. Mom was gripping the door handle but smiling despite herself. I can't believe my daughter drives something that makes this much noise. Your daughter, I said, downshifting as we approached a curve, has been surprising you for months. You just weren't paying attention. The comment could have sounded harsh, but the laughter that filled the car made it clear that everyone understood. We had moved past hurt feelings into the territory of genuine amazement and family recalibration. When we returned to the house, the dynamic had shifted permanently. The questions that followed weren't about whether my success was real or sustainable, but about how I had achieved it and what came next. Dad wanted to understand the business model. Mom was curious about the creative process. Elena asked about managing employees and handling the pressure of big contracts. Rick, meanwhile, spent the rest of the evening researching Ferrari models and asking detailed questions about the buying process, though he was careful to emphasize that he was asking for educational purposes rather than immediate shopping plans. The conversation that had started with them criticizing the irresponsible Ferrari owner ended with them celebrating their daughter and sister who had built something extraordinary while they weren't looking. The car had become a symbol not of reckless spending, but of dreams achieved through determination and talent. As the evening wound down and Rick and Elena prepared to leave, my sister pulled me aside for a private conversation. The housing market has been bringing in people from all kinds of backgrounds. I realized they were going to continue speculating indefinitely, creating increasingly elaborate theories about who could own the car and why they had chosen to park it on this particular street. The conversation could go on for another 20 minutes without getting any closer to the truth, unless I forced the issue. My hand found the key fob in my pocket, and I felt its familiar weight against my fingers. The moment had arrived where I either revealed everything or continued living a lie that was becoming more elaborate and uncomfortable by the minute. Actually, I said, my voice coming out steadier than I felt, I can tell you exactly who owns it. The group turned toward me with expressions of polite interest, clearly expecting me to share some neighborhood gossip or local knowledge about recent residents. I pulled the key fob from my pocket and held it up, my thumb hovering over the unlock button. It's mine. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the background sounds of the neighborhood seemed to fade away, leaving only the weight of 5 people processing information that didn't match anything they thought they knew about reality. Elena was the first to speak, her voice small and confused. What do you mean, it's yours? Instead of explaining, I pressed the unlock button. The Ferrari's lights flashed once, and the distinctive sound of the door handles emerging filled the quiet street. The mechanical precision of the car's response felt like an exclamation point at the end of a sentence none of them had seen coming. Rick's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Dad blinked repeatedly, as if trying to clear his vision. Mom's hand went to her chest in the unconscious gesture she made when receiving surprising news. You own this car, Elena said slowly, her voice still carrying disbelief. I bought it 2 months ago, I confirmed, walking over to the driver's side door. The handle extended automatically as I approached, a small technological marvel that I had grown to love but which now felt like I was showing off. But how? Mom asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I opened the door and gestured to the interior that Rick had been admiring through the window. The design business has been doing better than I let on. Much better. Rick was staring at me like I had just performed magic. Maya, this car costs around $200,000, I finished. I know. I wrote the check. Dad was shaking his head slowly, trying to reconcile the daughter he thought he knew with the person standing in front of him. Your little freelance work paid for a Ferrari? The word little stung, even though I knew he didn't mean it dismissively. But it revealed how fundamentally they had misunderstood the scope and success of what I had been building. It's not little anymore, Dad. It hasn't been little for over a year. I run a design agency with 6 full-time employees. Last month we signed a contract worth $1.8 million. The numbers hung in the air like foreign currency. That needed translation. Elena's face was cycling through emotions so quickly I couldn't track them all. Confusion, shock, something that might have been hurt, and underneath it all, a growing recognition that everything she thought she knew about her sister was wrong. 1.8 million, Rick repeated, his voice faint. That's just one contract. I said, surprised by how good it felt to finally speak these truths out loud. We have 12 active clients right now, and a waiting list for new projects. Mom sat down heavily on the curb, her legs apparently deciding they couldn't support her anymore. Why didn't you tell us? The question I had been dreading and preparing for simultaneously. How do you explain that you kept quiet because their love felt conditional on your struggle? How do you say that their concern had become a cage you needed to escape before you could admit to thriving? Because every time I tried to share good news, it got minimized or explained away, I said as gently as I could. When I mentioned landing bigger clients, you worried about whether the work was sustainable. When I talked about expanding the business, you suggested I should look for something more stable. I started to feel like my success was making you uncomfortable. Elena's face crumpled with what looked like guilt. We were trying to protect you. We thought you were struggling and didn't want to admit it. I know, I said, and I meant it. Your intentions were good. But the effect was that I felt like I had to choose between your approval and my ambition. So I stopped talking about the ambition. Dad was walking slowly around the car again, but this time his expression was different. Instead of skeptical appreciation, he looked like he was seeing it for the first time. This is really yours, he said, more to himself than to anyone else. Really mine. Bought and paid for. No financing, no help from anyone else. Rick was grinning now, the shock giving way to genuine excitement. I need to apologize, she said, her voice serious. Not just for today, but for the past year. I've been treating you like someone who needed my guidance when you were actually lapping me in terms of achievement. Elena, you don't need to. Yes, I do, she interrupted. I was so focused on my own life, my own milestones, that I couldn't see what you were accomplishing. I made assumptions about your struggles without asking about your successes. I hugged her tightly, feeling the sister bond that had sometimes been strained by different life paths clicking back into place. We're both figuring it out, I said. Just in different ways. But you figured it out faster and better than any of us gave you credit for, she said with a smile. I'm proud of you, Maya. And I'm sorry it took a Ferrari to make me say so. Mom and Dad's conversations with me that evening were equally meaningful, though more awkward as they grappled with realizing how thoroughly they had misunderstood my situation. Their concern had been real, but it had been based on outdated information and assumptions that I had inadvertently reinforced by downplaying my success. We want to understand, Mom said as she walked me to the car at the end of the evening. Not just the business, but why you felt like you couldn't share it with us. Because I wasn't sure you'd believe it, I admitted. And because I was afraid that if it didn't work out, having you know about the failure would hurt worse than having you worry about my struggles. Dad nodded with understanding. So you protected yourself by letting us think less of your capabilities than we should have. Something like that. Well, he said, looking at the Ferrari with newfound appreciation, I think we can all agree that your capabilities have been thoroughly established. The drive home that night felt different than any I had taken before. Not because the car was any more powerful or beautiful than it had been that morning, but because for the first time since buying it, I didn't feel like I was living two separate lives. The Maya who drove a Ferrari to client meetings and the Maya who endured gentle concern at family dinners had finally merged into one person whose success was acknowledged by the people whose opinion mattered most. The Ferrari had been a symbol of achievement when I bought it, but that evening it became something more. It became the catalyst that forced my family to see me as I actually was rather than as they thought I should be. It represented not just financial success, but the courage to claim a life that exceeded their expectations and my own. 6 months later, Elena and Rick got married in a ceremony that was beautiful, heartfelt, and perfectly suited to their shared vision of happiness. I designed their wedding invitations, programs, and signage as my gift to them, work that combined my professional skills with my love for my sister in a way that felt meaningful for all of us. Rick bought a Ferrari 6 months after his promotion was finalized, a decision that Elena supported enthusiastically and my parents accepted with good humor. We sometimes take weekend drives together, sister and sister-in-law, talking about business and marriage and the unexpected ways life can exceed your expectations when you stop limiting yourself to other people's definitions of possible. The Sunday dinners at Mom's house still happen, but the conversations have evolved. Instead of gentle concern about my future, there are questions about business strategy and creative challenges. Instead of suggestions for more stable career paths, there are requests for professional advice and introductions to potential clients. The family dynamic remains warm and supportive, but it's now based on who I actually am rather than who they thought I should become. Sometimes I think about that afternoon when Rick first spotted the Ferrari and wonder how different things might have been if I had remembered to switch cars. Would I have continued living my dual existence indefinitely? Would my family have ever seen me clearly without the shock of realizing they had been fundamentally wrong about my capabilities? But then I remember the feeling of finally being seen and celebrated for achievements I had kept hidden, and I'm grateful for the construction detour that forced everything into the open. Sometimes the best revelations are the ones that happen by accident, when you're too surprised to overthink the moment and too committed to the truth to back down. The Ferrari remains parked in my driveway, no longer a secret but not exactly a statement either. It's simply what I drive, a choice that reflects my success and my preferences without requiring justification or apology. My family has learned to see it as an extension of who I am rather than evidence of who I'm not, and that shift in perspective has changed everything about how we relate to each other. Success, I've learned, isn't just about achieving your goals. It's about having the courage to claim your achievements and the wisdom to share them with people who love you enough to recalibrate their expectations when the evidence demands it. Sometimes that requires a Ferrari parked in exactly the right place at exactly the right moment, but mostly it requires the decision to stop hiding who you've become from the people who matter most. The weeks that followed that Sunday afternoon unfolded like watching a film play in reverse, with layers of misunderstanding slowly peeling away to reveal the person I had always been underneath. My family began noticing things they had somehow missed before: the confidence in my voice when discussing work, the quality of my clothes that I had gradually upgraded over months, the way my phone constantly buzzed with client calls and messages that I handled with professional efficiency. Mom started paying attention to my answers during our weekly check-ins, really listening instead of waiting for cues that I needed guidance or financial assistance. She noticed that when she asked if I needed anything, I genuinely didn't. When she offered to help with groceries or gas money, I politely declined, not out of pride but because I actually had those things covered. The daughter she had been worrying about had evolved into a woman who was not only self-sufficient but thriving. And the adjustment period was both wonderful and slightly disorienting for both of us. Dad's transformation was perhaps the most dramatic. The man who had spent months dropping hints about stable employment and practical career choices suddenly found himself asking for my business advice. His small accounting firm had been struggling with outdated marketing materials, and he sheepishly admitted that he could use some professional guidance on updating his brand image. The conversation we had about his business needs was the first time he had ever sought my professional expertise, and I could see him reconciling the Maya he thought he knew with the Maya who was confidently analyzing his target market and suggesting strategic improvements. Elena's adjustment took longer but ultimately went deeper. As the older sister who had always been the family success story, she needed time to recalibrate not just her understanding of my achievements but her own identity within our family dynamic. There were moments of awkwardness as we figured out how to relate to each other as equals rather than as the responsible sister and the one who needed looking after. But gradually, those conversations evolved into something richer and more authentic than what we had shared before. The first time Elena called me for advice about a difficult situation at work, asking me to help her think through a conflict with her supervisor, I realized that our relationship had fundamentally shifted. She was no longer the sister who had figured everything out talking to the sister who was still searching for direction. We were two adult women with different types of expertise, sharing perspectives and supporting each other through the various challenges that come with building careers and lives that matter. Rick became one of my biggest champions, seemingly delighted to discover that his future sister-in-law was not only successful but successful in a field he found fascinating. He started referring colleagues and friends who needed design work, and several of those referrals turned into significant projects that further expanded my client base. More importantly, he began treating me as a peer in conversations about business strategy and professional growth, asking thoughtful questions about entrepreneurship and creative industries that showed genuine respect for what I had built. The ripple effects extended beyond my immediate family into my broader social circle and professional network. Colleagues who had known me as Elena's artistically inclined younger sister suddenly understood that my design business was not a hobby that might eventually lead to something stable, but a legitimate enterprise that was already exceeding most traditional measures of career success. The shift in how people responded to my work was subtle but noticeable, with conversations moving from encouraging my creative pursuits to recognizing my business acumen. But perhaps the most significant change was internal. For months, I had been compartmentalizing my life, dimming my professional achievements in family settings and sometimes even questioning whether my success was as real or substantial as it felt in client meetings and financial statements. The Ferrari revelation forced me to integrate all aspects of my identity, to to be Maya the successful entrepreneur even in contexts where that had previously felt inappropriate or uncomfortable. The process of integration wasn't always smooth. There were moments when family members would forget and slip back into old patterns of gentle concern or unsolicited advice, requiring gentle corrections that reminded everyone of the new reality. There were also moments when I had to consciously resist the urge to downplay my achievements or apologize for my success, habits that had developed over months of trying to make others comfortable with my unconventional path. One particularly meaningful conversation happened about 6 weeks after the Ferrari revelation, during a quiet moment at another Sunday dinner. Mom and I were alone in the kitchen while she prepared coffee, and she suddenly stopped what she was doing and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "I need to ask you something," she said, her voice carrying the weight of a question she had been formulating for weeks. "Did we make you feel like you couldn't tell us about your success? Did our worry somehow become pressure for you to stay small?" The question hit me like a gentle punch to the stomach, not because it was unfair but because it was so perceptive. Mom had identified something that I had been struggling to articulate even to myself, the way that loving concern could become a kind of ceiling, limiting not just what family members expected but what you allowed yourself to achieve or acknowledge. "Not intentionally," I said carefully, trying to find words that were honest without being hurtful. "But I think I started believing that my success would make you uncomfortable, that it would be easier to let you worry about me than to risk disappointing you if things didn't work out." She nodded slowly, processing this with the seriousness it deserved. "We raised you to be humble and grateful for what you had. Maybe we accidentally taught you to be apologetic for wanting more." "Maybe," I agreed. "Or maybe I just needed time to believe in my own success before I could expect anyone else to believe in it." The conversation that followed was one of the most honest we had ever shared about ambition, family expectations, and the sometimes complicated intersection between love and encouragement. Mom admitted that she had been more comfortable worrying about my financial security than celebrating my professional achievements, partly because worry felt like active parenting while celebration felt like stepping back. I admitted that I had been more comfortable with her worry than her pride, because worry felt familiar while recognition felt vulnerable. We talked about the difference between supporting someone through struggle and supporting them through success, and how the latter sometimes requires different skills and different assumptions about what kind of help or encouragement is most valuable. It was a conversation that I think many families need to have but rarely do, about how to love someone through their achievements without accidentally minimizing them or making them feel guilty for exceeding expectations. The practical changes that followed were subtle but meaningful. Family conversations began including questions about my clients and projects, not from worry about stability but from genuine interest in the creative and strategic challenges I was navigating. When I mentioned working late or traveling for client meetings, the responses shifted from concern about my work-life balance to appreciation for my dedication and professionalism. Perhaps most importantly, my success became something that could be celebrated openly rather than something that needed to be hidden or minimized for the comfort of others. Elena started mentioning my business accomplishments to friends and extended family members, clearly proud of her sister's achievements in a way that felt authentic rather than performative. Dad began recommending my services to his own clients and colleagues, conversations that would have been impossible when he saw my work as a creative hobby rather than professional expertise. The Ferrari itself became less of a symbol and more of a practical reality, though one that continued to surprise people who had known me in my pre-success phase. Parking it at client meetings occasionally led to conversations about the relationship between image and credibility in business, with some clients clearly impressed by the signal it sent about my success and others more interested in the story of how a young designer had built a business substantial enough to afford such a vehicle. I learned to navigate these conversations with honesty and humor, neither apologizing for the car nor using it to intimidate or impress. It was simply what I drove, a choice that reflected both my success and my personal preferences, and I found that treating it matter-of-factly made others more comfortable with the apparent contradiction between my age and my apparent wealth. The business continued growing throughout this period, partly because of referrals from family and friends who now understood what I did well enough to recommend me credibly, and partly because my own confidence and clarity about my professional identity made me more effective in client relationships and project management. Success, I discovered, has a momentum of its own, with each achievement making subsequent achievements more likely and more substantial. By the end of the year, Maya Creative had expanded to 10 full-time employees and a waiting list of clients. That extended months into the future. We moved into a proper office space in downtown Tampa, a converted warehouse with exposed brick walls and floor-to-ceiling windows that provided both the creative atmosphere my team needed and the professional credibility that impressed corporate clients. The space was beautiful and functional, but more importantly, it was a physical manifestation of what we had built together. The office warming party became an unexpected family celebration, with Mom and Dad, Elena and Rick, and dozens of friends and colleagues gathering to toast not just the new space but the journey that had brought us there. Watching my parents mingle with my employees and clients, seeing them understand my work through the eyes of people who respected and valued what I had created, felt like the final piece of integration I had been seeking. Elena gave a toast that evening that captured something essential about the experience we had all shared. She talked about the difference between knowing someone and seeing them clearly, about how love sometimes requires the courage to update your understanding of the people you care about most. She talked about being proud not just of my business success but of my persistence in building something meaningful despite the well-intentioned skepticism of people who loved me but didn't always understand me. Rick added his own perspective about the relationship between risk and reward, acknowledging that the Ferrari purchase that had initially seemed so shocking now looked like a perfectly reasonable celebration of achievements that none of us had fully grasped at the time. He joked that he was still researching his own Ferrari purchase but had learned to appreciate the difference between wanting something and being ready for it, both financially and emotionally. Dad's contribution to the evening was perhaps the most meaningful, as he publicly acknowledged that his advice about stable careers and practical choices had been based on his own experiences and limitations rather than my actual capabilities or the realities of the modern economy. He admitted that entrepreneurship and creative industries had evolved far beyond his understanding, and that my success had taught him as much about business and determination as any formal education he had received. Mom's toast was simpler but somehow more profound, as she talked about the difference between worrying about your children and trusting them, and how learning to do the latter had allowed her to see not just my achievements but my character more clearly. She said that the proudest moment of her parenting career had not been watching me succeed, but watching me handle success with grace and generosity toward people who had doubted me. The evening felt like a culmination and a beginning simultaneously, celebrating what had been accomplished while acknowledging that the journey was far from over. My business was thriving, my family relationships had deepened and become more authentic, and I had learned to integrate all aspects of my identity into a coherent whole that felt sustainable and genuine. In the months that followed, the story of the Ferrari revelation became part of our family mythology, told and retold at gatherings with increasing humor and decreasing embarrassment as everyone became more comfortable with the new normal it had established. The narrative evolved from a shocking surprise to a gentle lesson about assumptions and expectations, and ultimately to a celebration of growth and possibility that had benefited everyone involved. Elena's wedding planning benefited from my professional expertise and family connections, with vendors and venues eager to work with someone whose business they respected. Rick's bachelor party included a Ferrari driving experience that I arranged through contacts in the luxury car community, an event that delighted everyone and created memories that strengthened our family bonds. The business continued expanding, eventually opening a second location in Miami to serve clients throughout South Florida. My team grew to include specialists in digital marketing, brand strategy, and client relations, allowing me to focus on the creative and strategic work that had always been my strength while building systems that could operate successfully without my constant oversight. 2 years after the Ferrari revelation, I bought a house in Hyde Park that was large enough to include a proper home office and beautiful enough to serve as a backup location for client meetings when the downtown office was booked. The house was a Spanish colonial with original tile work and a pool surrounded by citrus trees, the kind of home that felt both successful and welcoming. The housewarming party was another family celebration, though this time the surprise was mine rather than theirs. Mom and Dad presented me with a framed copy of one of my childhood drawings, a detailed fantasy world that showed early evidence of the design sensibility that had eventually become my career. Elena and Rick gave me a custom-made sign for my home office that read, Maya Creative, where dreams become brands, a playful acknowledgement of both my professional identity and my journey from family dreamer to recognized entrepreneur. The gift that moved me most, however, came from an unexpected source. James Rodriguez, the luxury car broker who had sold me the Ferrari, attended the party and brought with him a photo book documenting the history of my car, from its original manufacture in Italy through its previous owners to its eventual sale to me. The final page included photos of me with the Ferrari on the day I bought it, images I had never seen but which captured the moment when I first allowed myself to claim something beautiful simply because I had earned it. Looking through that photo book with my family gathered around me, I realized that the Ferrari had been important not because of what it represented to others, but because of what it had required from me. Buying it had forced me to acknowledge my own success, to move beyond the comfortable familiarity of struggle into the more complex territory of achievement and responsibility. The car itself continued to be a source of joy and practical transportation, though it was no longer the most expensive or impressive thing I owned. What remained constant was what it symbolized: the courage to claim what you have earned, the wisdom to grow beyond other people's limitations, and the grace to share your success with people who love you enough to celebrate your achievements even when they exceed their expectations. Today, Maya Creative is recognized as one of the leading design agencies in Florida, with clients ranging from Fortune 500 companies to innovative startups across multiple industries. My team of 25 employees works on projects that challenge us creatively and professionally, and I wake up every morning excited about the problems we get to solve and the brands we get to build. The Ferrari is now one of 3 cars in my garage, joined by a practical SUV for client meetings and a vintage convertible that I bought simply because I fell in love with its design. Each vehicle serves different purposes and represents different aspects of my life, but none carries the symbolic weight that the Ferrari once did because I no longer need symbols to validate my success. My family has become my biggest supporters and most valuable advisors, offering perspectives and connections that have helped grow the business in ways I could never have achieved alone. The relationships that were once complicated by mismatched expectations have evolved into partnerships based on mutual respect and genuine understanding of each other's strengths and aspirations. Elena and Rick built a beautiful life together, with careers they love and a home that reflects their shared values and individual personalities. They remain happily married, with 2 children who call me Aunt Maya and think it's perfectly normal that their aunt drives interesting cars and runs a company with her name on the building. Mom and Dad have become enthusiastic supporters of entrepreneurship and creative careers, offering advice and encouragement to young people in their community who are building unconventional paths to success. They tell the story of their daughters' Ferrari revelation as an example of how love sometimes requires the humility to admit when you've been wrong and the courage to celebrate achievements that exceed your understanding. Looking back on that Sunday afternoon when Rick first spotted the Ferrari outside my parents' house, I'm grateful for the accident that forced everything into the open. The conversation that followed changed not just how my family saw me, but how I saw myself and what I believed was possible when you stop hiding who you've become from the people who matter most. The lesson I learned wasn't just about success or family dynamics, but about the relationship between authenticity and achievement. You can build something extraordinary while keeping it hidden, but you can't fully enjoy or sustain it until you're willing to share it with people who love you enough to recalibrate their expectations when the evidence demands it. Sometimes that requires a Ferrari parked in exactly the right place at exactly the right moment, but mostly it requires the decision to stop apologizing for your achievements and start celebrating them with people who are capable of celebrating with you. The courage to be seen clearly is just as important as the work required to become someone worth seeing, and both are essential for building a life that feels authentic and sustainable. 5 years have passed since that transformative Sunday afternoon, and the world looks entirely different from behind the wheel of what has become my everyday reality. The morning commute to my downtown Tampa office takes me through the heart of a city that has embraced innovation and entrepreneurship, past buildings that house the kinds of companies I once only dreamed of working with. The Ferrari glides through traffic with the same precision it always has, but now it carries a woman who has learned to wear success like a perfectly tailored jacket rather than an uncomfortable costume. Maya Creative has evolved into something that even my most ambitious projections couldn't have anticipated. We now operate from a 15,000 square foot headquarters that occupies the entire 3rd floor of a restored cigar factory in Ybor City, with exposed brick walls lined with awards and client testimonials that tell the story of a company that has consistently exceeded expectations. The space itself has become a destination for potential clients, who often request tours just to experience an environment where creativity and professionalism coexist so seamlessly. The team has grown to 38 full-time employees, each one carefully selected not just for their technical skills but for their alignment with the company culture we've deliberately cultivated. Our conference room walls display case studies from projects that have launched Fortune 500 product lines, rebranded international nonprofits, and established visual identities for companies that have gone on to become household names. What started as Maya struggling to pay rent in a 400 square foot studio has become Maya Creative, setting industry standards for design excellence and client satisfaction. But perhaps the most meaningful transformation has been in my role within my own family. The woman who once sat silently while relatives discussed her limitations now serves as the family's unofficial business advisor, with cousins calling for guidance on launching their own ventures and aunts seeking recommendations for everything from investment strategies to professional development. The shift hasn't always been comfortable, as learning to accept recognition and authority within family dynamics requires a different kind of confidence than succeeding in professional settings. Last month, my cousin Sophia approached me about funding her restaurant concept, a farm-to-table establishment specializing in Colombian fusion cuisine. The conversation we had over coffee would have been unimaginable during the years when my family viewed me as someone who needed financial guidance rather than someone capable of providing it. Sophia spoke to me with the deference typically reserved for bank loan officers, carefully presenting her business plan and financial projections while I evaluated her proposal with the analytical skills I've developed through years of assessing client projects and growth opportunities. The experience of reviewing Sophia's pitch materials forced me to confront how completely my position within our extended family has transformed. Her restaurant concept was sound, her passion was genuine, and her financial needs were well within my capacity to address. The Maya who had once hidden her success to avoid making others uncomfortable was now being asked to leverage that success to help family members achieve their own dreams. I ultimately decided to provide Sophia with the seed funding she needed, structuring the arrangement as a proper business investment rather than a family favor. The terms we negotiated were fair to both parties and included mentorship components that would allow me to share business development strategies that could benefit her venture. Watching Sophia's face transform from nervous hope to genuine excitement as we finalized our agreement reminded me of my own journey from uncertainty to confidence, and the profound impact that one person's belief can have on another's willingness to take calculated risks. The ripple effects of my professional success have extended far beyond immediate family into the broader Tampa Bay business community, where Maya Creative has become synonymous with innovative design solutions and reliable project delivery. We've been featured in national design publications, invited to speak at industry conferences, and recruited for collaborations with agencies in New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago. The recognition feels gratifying, but more importantly, it has created opportunities to mentor other entrepreneurs and contribute to the creative ecosystem that supported my own growth. Elena and Rick's marriage has flourished in ways that reflect the stability and mutual support that drew them together initially. Their twin daughters, Carmen and Isabella, are now 3 years old and possess the kind of fearless curiosity that reminds me daily of the importance of nurturing ambition rather than limiting it. When they visit my office, they treat the creative workspace like a playground, fascinated by the large format printers, the sample materials library, and the digital design stations where their aunt's team brings ideas to life. Watching Elena navigate motherhood while maintaining her nursing career has given me profound respect for the different ways women can build meaningful lives. Her choice to prioritize family stability over professional advancement is just as valid and valuable as my decision to focus intensively on business growth, and our conversations have helped both of us understand that success manifests differently depending on individual values and circumstances. Rick has finally purchased his own Ferrari, a decision that took 3 years of careful financial planning and extensive research into models, maintenance costs, and insurance implications. The day he drove it home from the dealership, we took a photo together in front of our respective cars, both of us grinning with the satisfaction of people who had worked toward specific goals and achieved them through patience and determination. The image now sits framed in my office, a reminder that dreams deferred are not necessarily dreams denied. Mom and Dad have embraced their roles as grandparents with the same dedication they once brought to worrying about my career prospects. Their house has been gradually transformed into a child-friendly environment, with safety gates and toy boxes coexisting with the formal furniture they once protected so carefully. The energy they once devoted to managing my perceived struggles has been redirected toward supporting Elena's family and celebrating my professional achievements with equal enthusiasm. Dad's accounting practice has benefited significantly from the design refresh I provided, with new clients consistently commenting on the professional appearance of his materials and office environment. He's learned to talk about brand identity and visual communication with surprising sophistication, concepts that once seemed irrelevant to his traditional approach to business development. Our professional relationship has evolved into genuine collaboration, with referrals flowing in both directions as we've identified complementary service opportunities. The conversation that began with Rick's innocent question about the Ferrari has become a family legend, retold at holidays and special occasions with increasing embellishment and decreasing embarrassment. The story has taken on mythical proportions among extended family and family friends, becoming shorthand for the dangers of making assumptions about people's capabilities and the importance of allowing loved ones to exceed your expectations. But the most significant change has been internal, in my relationship with ambition itself. The years of hiding my success taught me valuable lessons about the difference between humility and self-diminishment, between gratitude and apologetic smallness. I've learned to accept compliments gracefully, to charge appropriately for my expertise, and to occupy space in professional settings without constantly qualifying my presence or achievements. This confidence has translated into bolder business decisions and more ambitious project proposals. Maya Creative now pursues contracts that would have terrified me during the early years, working with clients whose budgets exceed what I once made in entire fiscal periods. The projects themselves have become more complex and impactful, involving comprehensive brand strategies for companies preparing for public offerings or international expansions that will affect thousands of employees and millions of customers. One particularly meaningful project involved rebranding a healthcare nonprofit that provides services to undocumented immigrants throughout Florida. The organization had been operating with outdated materials that failed to communicate the professionalism and compassion of their work, potentially limiting their ability to secure funding and community support. Our design solution needed to convey trustworthiness and accessibility while remaining culturally sensitive and linguistically appropriate for diverse populations. The project required months of community research, stakeholder interviews, and iterative design development, but the final result exceeded everyone's expectations. The new visual identity helped the organization secure their largest grant in institutional history and expand their services to 3 additional counties. Seeing our design work contribute to improved healthcare access for vulnerable populations reminded me of why I had been drawn to this profession initially, and how business success could serve purposes larger than personal achievement. Maya Creative's commitment to pro bono work has become an essential aspect of our company culture, with each team member contributing time annually to projects that support local nonprofits, educational institutions, and community development initiatives. These projects keep us connected to the broader social context of our work while providing opportunities for creative experimentation that benefit our paid client projects. The financial rewards of sustained business success have enabled lifestyle choices that once seemed impossible but now feel natural and appropriate. The house in Hyde Park has been expanded to include a guest suite where family members stay during visits, and the backyard has been landscaped to accommodate the dinner parties I host for clients, employees, and friends. The space reflects both my personal aesthetic and professional brand, serving as an extension of the office environment in a more intimate setting. Travel has become both a business necessity and personal pleasure, with client meetings taking me to cities across the country and design conferences exposing me to global trends and innovative approaches. Each trip provides opportunities to study visual culture in different contexts, collecting insights and inspiration that inform future projects. The Ferrari remains my preferred vehicle for local travel, but international projects have introduced me to the luxury of first-class flights and 5-star hotels that make business travel genuinely enjoyable rather than merely tolerable. The wardrobe that once consisted primarily of thrift store finds and clearance items has evolved into a carefully curated collection of pieces that project competence and creativity in professional settings. Shopping for clothes has transformed from a financial necessity into a strategic exercise, with each purchase considered for its contribution to the professional image that represents both my personal brand and my company's reputation. But material acquisitions have never been the primary motivation for business growth. The deeper satisfaction comes from creative challenges that push our team's capabilities and client relationships that evolve into genuine partnerships. When a startup we rebranded 5 years ago calls to discuss their expansion into European markets, or when a Fortune 500 company requests our involvement in a merger announcement, I feel the pride of someone whose work has contributed to other people's success stories. The mentorship opportunities that have emerged from Maya Creative's reputation have become particularly meaningful, with young designers and entrepreneurs seeking guidance on everything from client management to pricing strategies. These conversations remind me of my own journey from uncertainty to confidence, and the transformative power of having someone believe in your potential before you fully believe in it yourself. One recent mentee, a 24-year-old named Jasmine who graduated from design school with exceptional technical skills but limited business experience, has been working with our team as a freelancer while developing her own client base. Watching her navigate the same challenges I faced years ago, but with the benefit of guidance and support, has shown me how much more efficiently success can be achieved when someone doesn't have to discover every lesson through trial and error. Jasmine's progress over the past 18 months has been remarkable, with her portfolio expanding to include logo designs for local businesses, website development for regional nonprofits, and marketing materials for professional service firms. Her success feels like a reflection of Maya Creative's commitment to fostering talent and supporting the broader design community, values that have become increasingly important as the company has grown. The relationships with my original clients have evolved into long-term partnerships that provide both financial stability and creative satisfaction. Marcus Thompson's fintech company, ClearPath, has become one of our anchor clients, with ongoing projects that include everything from investor presentation materials to user interface design for their mobile applications. The trust and mutual respect that has developed over years of successful collaboration has created a working relationship that feels more like friendship than traditional vendor-client dynamics. These established relationships have also become sources of referrals that consistently generate new business without the marketing efforts that consumed so much energy during the early years. Word-of-mouth recommendations from satisfied clients carry credibility that no advertising campaign could match, and the quality of referred prospects is typically much higher than leads generated through other channels. The team at Maya Creative has become a professional family, with employees who have grown alongside the company and contributed to its evolution in fundamental ways. Several team members have been promoted multiple times, taking on leadership responsibilities that allow them to develop managerial skills while contributing to strategic planning and business development initiatives. The company culture we've cultivated emphasizes collaboration over competition, with team members regularly sharing credit for successful projects and supporting each other through challenging deadlines or difficult client situations. Monthly team meetings include professional development components, with guest speakers, skills workshops, and brainstorming sessions that keep everyone engaged with industry trends and creative innovations. Our annual company retreat has become a highlight of the calendar, bringing the entire team together for 3 days of strategic planning, team building, and creative inspiration. Last year's retreat, held at a resort in Key Largo, included presentations from each department on their goals for the coming year, collaborative workshops on emerging design technologies, and social activities that strengthened personal relationships among team members. The financial success of Maya Creative has enabled profit-sharing programs and benefits packages that rival those offered by much larger corporations. Every employee receives health insurance, retirement plan contributions, and professional development allowances that support their continued growth and career advancement. The investment in employee satisfaction has resulted in remarkably low turnover rates and consistently high performance standards. Looking toward the future, Maya Creative is positioned for continued expansion, with opportunities to open offices in additional markets and develop specialized service offerings that address emerging client needs. The design industry continues evolving rapidly, with new technologies and changing consumer behaviors creating demand for innovative approaches to brand communication and digital engagement. The lessons learned from building Maya Creative have applications beyond the design industry, and I've been invited to speak at business schools and entrepreneurship conferences about the challenges and opportunities facing women-owned creative businesses. These speaking engagements provide platforms to share insights about everything from client relationship management to scaling creative teams, while contributing to conversations about diversity and inclusion in professional services. The story that began with a family dinner and a misunderstood Ferrari has become a case study in the importance of persistence, authenticity, and the courage to exceed other people's expectations. The car itself has become just one element of a life that reflects years of careful planning, strategic risk-taking, and unwavering commitment to creative excellence. When young entrepreneurs ask for advice about building sustainable businesses while maintaining authentic relationships with family and friends, I always return to the fundamental lesson from that Sunday afternoon: success becomes sustainable only when you're willing to share it honestly with people who love you enough to recalibrate their expectations when the evidence demands it. The Ferrari still sits in my driveway, now accompanied by 2 other vehicles that serve different purposes and represent different aspects of my evolved lifestyle. But none of them carry the symbolic weight that the Ferrari once did, because I no longer need symbols to validate my achievements or justify my choices to people whose opinions matter. The woman who once hid her success to avoid making others uncomfortable has learned to occupy space confidently and contribute meaningfully to conversations about business, creativity, and the particular challenges facing entrepreneurs who choose unconventional paths. The transformation required years of conscious effort, but it has resulted in relationships and opportunities that feel authentic and sustainable. Maya Creative continues growing, with each new client and completed project adding to a portfolio that represents not just design excellence but commitment to helping other people and organizations achieve their own ambitious goals. The work itself remains challenging and rewarding, with creative problems that push our team's capabilities and client relationships that evolve into genuine partnerships. The family dinners at Mom's house still happen regularly, but the conversations have evolved to reflect everyone's growth and changing circumstances. Elena's twins dominate much of the attention now, with their developmental milestones and amusing observations providing endless entertainment for doting grandparents and an aunt who spoils them with art supplies and encourages their creative experiments. When Carmen and Isabella visit the Maya Creative office, they treat the workspace like a wonderland of interesting tools and mysterious processes. Their uninhibited curiosity about design software, printing equipment, and prototype materials reminds me daily of the importance of nurturing creativity and supporting ambitious dreams, regardless of how unconventional they might seem to others. The future holds possibilities that would have been unimaginable from that studio apartment where I once worried about paying electric bills and wondered whether freelance design work could ever become something substantial. Maya Creative is positioned for continued expansion, with opportunities to serve larger clients, explore new markets, and develop innovative service offerings that address emerging needs in a rapidly evolving industry. But the most meaningful measure of success remains the satisfaction of work that matters, relationships that feel authentic, and the knowledge that I've built something substantial enough to support not just my own dreams but the aspirations of the talented people who have chosen to build their careers alongside mine. The Ferrari revelation taught me that love sometimes requires the courage to update your understanding of the people you care about most, and that success becomes meaningful only when it's shared with people who are capable of celebrating it genuinely. Those lessons continue shaping every aspect of how I approach business decisions, creative challenges, and personal relationships. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.